I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May, and we are looking to a brighter future because Gen Z, they do show up. We're Speaking starts now.
That seemed particularly loud today. I think I might have my speakers turned up too loud. Yeah, but it's always good. We have so few days between now, not like in the big picture, but before
I know, I was like, what?
Like the asteroid. Until that new Congress gets sworn in, which is almost as bad as the asteroid. We might end up like,
I know. Can't you give us a break?
Redirect the asteroid toward us, but
you're like putting the stuff in the aisles already, like the Christmas aisles before, Thanksgiving is up, that kind of thing. I'm like, I don't want to think about January.
No, January is going to be a shit show. And what we have thought so far was insanity in the GOP House member side. This was just like a teeny tiny preview of just how batshit crazy the Republicans in the House are going to get once they take over the majority. And really, Marjorie Taylor Greene gets the speakership because we all know she's going to be completely controlling everything that Kevin McCarthy does. He'll have the title, but it's really going to belong to like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar and Jim Jordan. Just the whole flock of shitbirds are really going to be running things.
I prefer flock of seagulls.
Yes, not a flock of shitbirds. But hey, we were short about 3,000 votes overall, so we didn't flip 5 seats that would have kept the House. So
hey, political people,
yes, those who got out. Yeah, not.
They're not watching. Everybody watching, y'all all voted. So
yeah, you all voted. But if you know those people, then please pass on our sentiments to them, because that 3,000 votes for 5 seats.
I'm upset.
Sucks. Yes. I really want to be able to enjoy the daily debasement of Kevin McCarthy once he does get that speakership. But this freak show is going to ensure that absolutely nothing meaningful, nothing in a good way is going to get accomplished in the House. But there is that bright spot that we are going to have the first person of color. Hakeem Jeffries is going to be taking over as minority leader. He is brilliant, and he does not have a single fuck to give when it comes to putting up with the BS and hypocrisy of like Jim Jordan to Clarence Thomas. He's amazing.
Yeah, all out of fucks. You want to know why? Just like Gen Z's all out of fucks, Black people are all out of fucks, people who are marginalized, we're just out. We're out. We're done. We've already seen what we've come to see.
A lot of fucks to give too.
We did have a lot.
And to have run out is pretty staggering.
Exactly. And so that is why I'm excited about our brighter future, because truly Gen Z calls people on their bullshit. They want facts. They want figures. They want actual results. They want accountability. They see through the game and they're like, nah, that's not for us. We want to make sure that our classrooms are safe. We want to make sure that we have our reproductive rights protected. And it is so incredibly important that they are speaking up, and you've seen it. And we always hear, oh, they don't show up, the youth vote, they don't show up, but they show up.
Yeah, they do.
They show up, and they're showing more. Lisa, we were just talking before the show, and you're like,
yeah,
they turned 18 and they just.
Right. Like people ask a lot, what is Gen Z? Well, the beginning of Gen Z was born in 2000. They started breaking turnout records in 2018, which means the very first chance this generation had to vote, they did better than Gen X or the boomers or millennials, Gen Y. They have just blown us all away, and they have done it in 2018, in 2020, and in 2022. And they're flipping elections.
Yeah. And so, but don't believe it from us. What do we know? We're just a bunch of Gen Xers over here. a lot of you are watching are like, what is this Gen Z? Well, thank goodness we have an incredible person here to represent Gen Z tonight. Victor Shi, I'm sure you've been following a lot of his work. He's a writer, speaker, strategy director for Voters of Tomorrow, co-host of the iGen Politics podcast. He's a weekly contributor to Resolute Square, and he's emerged as one of the leading voices analyzing Gen Z voting in the midterms. Seriously, I get my news from this guy. He's one of the few to get it right and get it early. And then he's also a full-time student at UCLA. Like, what? How? Welcome, Victor. Thank you for taking some time out of your very busy schedule to be with us. You make us feel like we're slacking. Are we slacking? We're slacking, aren't we?
Not at all. I mean, thank you so much, guys, for having me. It's so great to be here and finally to see you guys face to face.
Yes, it's amazing. Love it.
Awfully nice. There was a little, you work with Santiago Mayer.
Yes.
At Voters of Tomorrow. And there was a little exchange where you were talking about a new daily YouTube podcast that you're doing. And Santiago was marveling at like how the hell you do everything you do. And I asked a question, which you didn't answer, I don't think. Do you sleep? Like, where do you find the time? Like college for me, that was a full-time job. You're doing like 6.
Well, I try to get as much sleep as I can. Google Calendar is a big friend of mine. I like to kind of block things out in my calendar, kind of really stick to the schedule. But I try to get at least 6 or 7 hours of sleep a night, and that sustained me for the most part. And I'm looking forward to winter break when I get a chance to just breathe a little bit and then go back to work after that.
The amount of just stability, coherency, efficiency. I know so many people watching right now are going, okay, how do we get Victor to like mentor our teens? Because that's basically, I'm all like, you know what? Stop all of this activist stuff. Come to my house and get my teenager to do that is what I'm asking. But seriously, there is something different about your generation. What do you see as like the main difference, the big difference?
So I think this generation is really unique in many ways. And I think first off, it's just that we are the most diverse generation in America. We're the most educated generation in America. And we also just have so much going on in our lives, from climate change to gun shooter drills to student loan debt. And so all of these things are really immediate in our lives. And I think kind of shape our worldview, our identity, our experiences. And when you think about kind of what you said, Lisa, this is a generation that was barely alive starting in 2001 when 9/11 hit. We saw the 2008 financial crisis, but really the first kind of experience that we had in politics was Donald Trump's presidency. That was the first time when a lot of us started paying attention. We saw just this president who was just so hell-bent on just kind of destroying institutions, making sure that the rule of law isn't, alive, destroying democracy. And so these things were things that young people paid attention to and really kind of showed up and voted starting in 2018 for someone and elected officials who actually cared about our lives and cared about these institutions and democracy. And so I would say it's partly just the fact that we are so digitally connected, but also the fact that we are so educated, we're so diverse, and we're just ready to make our voices heard. And we aren't kind of waiting for someone else to do our part. We're just doing it ourselves.
It's like the coming of age story, teenage years under Donald Trump. Like that's the film.
Yeah. I mean, I remember being so excited to turn 18 and be able to vote. I was one of those people who like got choked up the first time I voted.
Yeah.
But I remember also being really disappointed that like I expected amazing people to be able to vote for. And I now realize that I did have that in comparison to what you faced with seeing Donald Trump be the first person that the American people actually selected to put. I mean, that has to be so disheartening, but maybe also inspiring.
Absolutely. So I co-host another podcast with Jill Wine-Banks, who I'm pretty sure was actually on your show a couple of months ago. And we talk a lot about Richard Nixon, who just broke so many norms and so many just kind of rules relating to the presidency. But what Donald Trump has done makes Richard Nixon look like child's just outright just like wrong what he's done. Things like the Monuments Clause. I was talking to someone the other day, and the Electoral Count Act, we never thought that we would have to deal with something like the Electoral Count Act, but under the Trump presidency, it was just time and time again you saw him just destroy all of these just just norms and rules that really make up the president and that just responsible presidents should follow. And so I think on one hand, it was really for young people seeing someone like Donald Trump. Yes, it's just angering and outrage and just kind of seeing someone who's so apparent and willing to just destroy our country. And then on the other hand, I think it is just also inspiring on the other hand to see so many young people show up to the ballot box and make their voices heard against all of these candidates who are just trying to make young people and our lives harder, I think.
Wow. I'm so impressed really by the outspokenness of the generation. And things do change. Like even from 2018 to now, we've seen so many shifts. What do pollsters, pundits, the ones who keep getting it wrong, what do they need to understand about the changing habits of Gen Z voters?
So, one of the things that I think we learned a lot from the last election, especially starting in 2018 through 2020 and a couple of weeks ago, is that how polls and pundits talk about Gen Zers, I think, is just really wrong. First of all, a lot of pollsters still rely on the traditional method of calling young voters, which is kind of out the door with this generation. I mean, I know for me, I don't really pick up phone calls when it comes from my parents, not to mention those coming from pollsters. So I think the likelihood of young people actually picking up a phone for more than a minute, 5 minutes is just very unlikely. So that's kind of out the door. And I think for pollsters who are trying to get a sense of Gen Zers, and I think our friend John Della Volpe does this great with his Harvard Youth poll, is that one, you have to meet young people where they are, which is on digital spaces and making sure that you can ask them through those mediums. And second, it's not so much asking young voters maybe their top 3 issues or whether or not they support a particular issue. It's trying to listen to young voters and what we have to say. So for example, one of the things that John does in his poll and that we've tried to emulate at our polls at Voters of Tomorrow is asking young voters what their values are. So what do they believe in? What are they passionate about? And then from there, you can start probing them on some of the questions that maybe traditional pollsters would ask. But I think at the end of the day, it's starting by asking young people and listening to what young people care about and value. And then I think that's where you kind of go from there and kind of get a better sense of where young voters fall.
I'm glad you brought up the work that John Della Volpe does. We've had him on a couple of times, and he really is, I think he's listening. So he understands Gen Z in a different way. Not everybody is getting there, and certainly not the GOP. They've spent the last 6 years pushing as hard as they could to offend Gen Z and go against everything that seems to be a priority and is a value of your generation. They momentarily after the midterms said that they needed to find ways to reach out and bring in non-traditional Republican voters, which would be Gen Z, because boy, do you guys not vote Republican. And one of their brilliant ideas was to raise the voting age to 21. So are they like really changing hearts and minds quickly among you guys? Do we have to worry about like 2024? You're all going to, those of you over 21 are going to vote for Republicans?
I mean, I think that the chances of young people overwhelmingly voting for Republicans in 2024 or in any other election going forward is really unlikely. And you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said this really started when Trump took office. You saw this this slow but gradual effort to start attacking young people, and it really kind of increased starting earlier this year when you saw Don't Say Gay bills out of Florida and Republican state legislatures, where a bunch of these Republican state legislatures introduced bills that would basically control what teachers and what LGBTQ people said in the classroom. You then had all this, critical race theory talk saying that, teachers are trying to indoctrinate children when that's just not the case. Critical race theory is something that's taught in law school, not high school or middle school. And so there was just this narrative to really sow division and fear in the classrooms. And young people saw right through that. And then earlier this summer, you had the leaked Dobbs decision, which basically overturned the right to abortion. That was the first time that young people ever saw a right that we grew up with overturned before our very own eyes. And so there's this kind of growing distrust within this institution and also just within the Republican Party that are just trying to denigrate our lives. And so time and time again, you see Republicans going after us. And then after the midterm elections, you would hope that Republicans, after seeing not a red wave, but a really kind of a blue wave, you think that they would kind of learn their lesson and start listening to young voters, but they don't. I mean, what they're doing right now is, like you said, they're trying to raise the age of voting, or they're attacking young people and calling us stupid for voting for Democrats. And that's just not a way that you try to reach out to and mobilize young voters. You have to just listen to young voters and then act on our concerns. And that's the difference between the Democratic and Republican parties, that the Republican Party just does not listen anymore. And it's sad, but that's just the reality that I think that we're seeing right now with them.
Yeah, Republicans sure do like to just bulldoze their ideas through, whether the electorate wants it or not. And I love that Gen Z's like not having it. And Republicans being able to adapt just doesn't seem to be a thing that they're interested in doing. The Democratic Party, I'm glad that you said the Democratic Party listens, because we often talk about this on the show, because we're like, are they doing any better? Do you find that with this voter turnout that now Democratic leadership is looking to young people more and bringing them into the party in a way that's different than before?
Definitely. So even before the election, one of the things that I think President Biden and Democrats have really understood starting, a few months before the election, was the importance of young voters as the messenger for some of their accomplishments and successes. They understood basically that young voters were more connected on digital platforms like TikTok and Instagram, where young voters consume their information, get their news. And one of the things that they tried doing before the election was they brought a bunch of TikTok influencers and activists to the White House and to various, the DNC, the DCCC. And they basically told them a lot of the successes and priorities that the administration was focusing on has gotten accomplished. And so what that then translated into was these young activists and influencers going to TikTok and spreading that information to young people who are on those platforms. And I think that made a huge difference. And I think after this election, you're going to kind of see the same trend from Democrats and President Biden, which is they understand that the messenger matters, and that to reach young people, it really takes kind of young people speaking with each other. And those peer-to-peer conversations really go a long way. And after this midterm election, there's this huge push now by a bunch of young activists and Voters of Tomorrow is trying to work with Youth and Gov, which is another great organization, to basically form some sort of youth advisory council, which was basically be stored within the White House or the executive branch of the presidency, and be that kind of table where young people can convene and give the president recommendations. Because now that we voted, we want to see that our voices matter in the process. I think time and time again, one of the things that you see a lot from both political parties is they say, go vote in this election. It's the most important election. But this election, we really want to see that we showed up and that it'll translate into something tangible. And I think that's the challenge for the administration. Hopefully, they'll bring young voices into the fold and at the table.
Is TikTok like digital door knocking for Gen Z? Because we know that that's super effective for older generations going to knock on a door, but I'm assuming if you knock on a Gen Z door, it's like, get away from the door.
Yeah.
So it like Discord, TikTok, things like that. Because one of our questions really was like, where do we find you? How do we find you? Gen Z? Where are they?
So I remember, back in 2016, so I started organizing starting in 2016 just on a congressional race, and I took my fall quarter off to organize on the Biden campaign. And one of the things that they do a lot in the trainings is they say you have to meet voters where they are. So usually the traditional model is when you try to meet older generations, that means going to coffee shops or going to churches or going to grocery stores and meeting people in person or at the door or calling people. But with young voters, that's just not the model. A lot of young people, and the majority of young people, consume their information from TikTok and also streaming platforms like Twitch. And so the way that you reach young voters and meet young voters where they are, it just isn't door to door or isn't in person anymore. It's online and in online spaces. And so I think when you're thinking about, and when campaigns think about what they are trying to do to reach young voters, that's why you see a lot of campaigns like, for example, the past election, John Fetterman did a lot to create memes, basically, because young people, one, have a really short attention span. And so memes kind of capture, one, the kind of information that we need, but also in an entertaining way. And then also John Fetterman was huge on TikTok. And you also saw that in 2020, right after the general election. What Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff did so wonderfully was they went to streaming platforms like Twitch and TikTok, and they created these kind of short snippets of what's most important to them and kind of spoke to Gen Zers. And while some of the dances might not have been the most smooth, they really tried to reach young voters. And I think that was a much more effective way than going to a door. Exactly. Than going to a dorm and knocking on our door. So I think now the equivalent of door knocking for young voters is online spaces.
I have generally found that Gen Zers give Gen Xers and older like some points for effort. even if we can't execute
Yes.
really well, it's sort of like
There's a little bit of pity in there.
speak a foreign language that that if it's your native
Right,
language, you're
right.
like, oh, that's so nice. At least they're trying. So yeah, at least they're trying and not pulling it off particularly well. I love that you are talking about these influencers and how that reached Gen Z, because before the election, one of the big things, I mean, it sort of illustrates how older people, middle-aged older people, including political professionals, don't understand what is happening with Gen Z at all, because there were an awful lot of us who were very worried that you all had no idea what Biden had accomplished. And it turned out on election day, we realized, oh, hell, they know better than our generation does. So the message got through and you're spreading it effectively. Do you now need to kind of flip the script and try to teach Gen Y, Gen X, boomers, like, how do you get the message out to them?
Yeah, so I think it's for me, and just kind of my experience, I think one of the things that I've tried to do in terms of getting the message out there is just really emphasizing the fact that Generation Z and millennials, we showed up in 2018, we showed up in 2020. There are a ton of articles out there. I remember a couple of days before by Politico that said young voters are basically MIA. And that was just so not true. If you looked at the data, if you looked at the early vote numbers, you saw that young voters were turning out at just extraordinary numbers and voting overwhelmingly for Democrats. And so it's just, I think, this narrative by a lot of the people in the media, especially cable news, I think it becomes sort of an echo chamber, especially on MSNBC and some of the other outlets where, a lot of their viewers are just older in age. Some of the pundits are older in age. They just don't have young people at the table commenting on the issues. So part of what I've been trying to do, and what a lot of voters of tomorrow and other young activists have been trying to do, is just constantly beating the drum about how this generation has shown up before, and we are only growing in political power. By 2024, millennials and Gen Zers will make up the biggest voting generation in America, more than any other generation. So when you think about who's going to carry political power, who's going to show up, it's going to be Gen Zers and millennials who are really going to decide the future of elections. Not saying that other generations aren't important. I think it takes a team effort. It takes all of us doing our part. But for Democrats, if they want any chance of winning, the investment must go to Gen Zers and millennials. And part of that must also be the media has to change their narrative around us, because I think the old-fashioned model of saying that older generations look down on younger generations and that younger generations don't vote just isn't the reality anymore. And so we really have to change that narrative. And I think it just starts with as many people going on platforms like Twitter, using the platforms they have to spread awareness about the power that this generation has, and then also that it's not an anomaly that we showed up in 2022. This has been 3 times that Generation Z and millennials have really shown up in key races, key battleground states, and have been key in deciding elections.
So it seems like it's pop culture, because I want to talk about pop culture really quickly. And companies, pop culture, Disney, they seem to get it. There's representation now in advertisements. There's representation in TV shows and movies, which Republicans call woke, which really is just, from what I'm seeing, responsiveness to what Gen Z wants and needs. So in capitalism, corporations, they have the bottom line. And so that's, in my mind, why they're doing that. But the politicians, it seems like they're missing that bottom line. Why do you think politicians are having a hard time getting it when advertisers and companies aren't?
It's really interesting. And I think, part of the companies, and I think just this kind of overall sense from Generation Z putting pressure on companies to do this, is that when we think about kind of the world that we want to imagine and that we want to live in, there is so much that is kind of thought about in pluralistic ways. So one of the things that defines Generation Z is that we are the first generation that thinks basically in pluralistic terms, in the sense that we don't think about just us and what we want. We want to think about what all of our peers want, because what affects one of us affects all of us. So if you think about something like, gun violence, what affects someone in Parkland, Florida, affects all of young people, because that's the kind of setting that we're all in and that we have to live in and we have to experience. And so a lot of the ways that we think really kind of go with that kind of plural point of view of, like, we think in we terms. So a lot of it is when we think about corporations and the decisions that they make, we want to see them actually care about young people and kind of bring diversity and bring people to the table, because if you don't have diverse people at the table, it's just so hard to get things done. And so young people have really tried to make that kind of a model for a lot of corporations. I think for politicians, it's interesting. And I think part of it has to do with just the way that a lot of elected officials have started to campaign, which is, at the end of the day, it's all about those kind of donors and those big money donors. It's so much about big money. If you think about Republicans, the NRA controls so much when it comes to passing meaningful gun legislation. All of these lobbyists and corporations have so much money, and they really kind of outweigh a lot of just the ordinary folks in our voices. And so it really takes something like losing an election for elected officials to start paying attention and caring, because they already have those donors and those lobbyists donating money to them. And so I think at the end of the day, for all of us, whether we're Gen Zers or older, to know that our voice matters, our vote matters, and that if we vote these elected officials out, then that's what will get their attention and make them kind of pay attention to our voices. But you really can't expect change without voting, I think.
Well, people are in a much bigger way than previously really starting to listen to your generation. You've described a couple of times, we've been talking like these big, either pivotal events or just kind of generational shared experiences. And a lot of them have not been good for your generation, whether it's COVID or all of the mass shootings in schools. But it seems like it's created this cohesiveness. And what you were describing, this, what happens to one of us happens to all of us. Do you think that is creating more of a bridge within your generation across party lines? Because there seems to be, you have existential threats that you're looking at, climate change and gun violence, and those things you've got to find a way to bridge. Are those bridges being built?
They are being built. And I was actually talking to a Republican Gen Zer on Twitter the other day via DM, and we were just talking about, some of the differences that we have. And we found that when it comes to values and what we care about in the world that we want to live in, at the end of the day, all we want to see is one, change. We really want to see representation and more young people getting involved, being civically empowered. And we just want to see a lot of the issues that have affected our lives start to improve. And so when you think about something like climate change or gun violence or student loan debt, these are all things that no matter what party you're from as a young person, you most likely will experience in your life. Young people are the most educated generation in America, which means that most of us are going to college. If you're going to college now, the price of education is through the roof. And so no matter if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat, you will probably be experiencing that. And so that's a shared kind of bond for a lot of young people. The same with gun violence. That's something that most schools have to go through. Now, shooter drills are commonplace in a lot of elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, even colleges. And so that's something that really binds us together. And then also just this kind of willingness from young people, and no matter what party you're from, just to see everyone participate in this process. Because no matter what, I think young people realize that for a lot of the time, our voices have been ignored, they've been sidelines, we've been forgotten. And so we just want to see more young people, no matter what party we're from, to go out there and make their voices heard. But the sad reality is that you have one party that I think is really committed to doing that. And that's why so many young people have voted for Democrats. But the other party just really hasn't shown that. And I try not to get too political, but I mean, that's, I think, the reality. You have this one party that has done everything they can to attack our lives, and it's become really hard for any young person to support the Republican Party nowadays. And so, it's cutting across both party lines, but it's becoming really hard to, I think, support that one party that really seeks to destroy a lot of the rights that we cherish.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I know Gen Z is not a monolith, and there are people like the Nick Fuenteses of the world. Yeah. And right now we have coming up America Fest 2022. And so I'm curious, what part of Gen Z, does this kind of messaging appeal to, and how can we reach them before they're flying with Kanye to go see Trump? Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the young Republican demographic is diminishing by the day, because if you look at the type of young Republicans that are out there, they're mostly white young Republicans. They aren't the type of diverse kind of generation that's emblematic of Gen Zers. And, they make up a huge voice though on college campuses. If you think of college campuses like Turning Point USA or the Ben Shapiro's of the world, they make up a huge voice. They're really loud. They're really vocal. They tend to take up a lot of space. They're very critical. They like to blast a lot of people on college campuses. But at the end of the day, it's kind of representative of this broader Republican Party, which is that their goal is to intimidate, to stoke fear, to stoke division, to make people exhausted of constantly hearing their noise. And at the end of the day, I think they really expect people to not turn out to vote because they see something like that. But like we saw back in 2022, back in 2018, back in 2020, young people are deterred by that. We will show up, we will make our voices heard, and we won't kind of fall into this kind of attempt to sow division and exhaustion into our lives. But they do make up a big portion of kind of this Gen Z voice, but there aren't many of them out there. And so when you think about, how we show up at the ballot box, I think the most important thing is that there are more of us than there are more of them. The Turning Point USAs of the world, they may be the loudest, but they definitely aren't representative of Gen Z. And, how do we reach them? I'm not sure if we can reach them at this point because they're so kind of ingrained within that kind of right-wing culture. I hope the more conversations we have, the more we can kind of tell them that their voice matters and that it's the Republican Party that's trying to attack their lives. But it's kind of like the whole Donald Trump, that 30% of the electorate thing. He can kind of stand on New York Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and people will still support him. And I think that's also what you'll see among those Turning Point USA crowd. It's really hard to move them. But at the end of the day, it's knowing that there are more of us than there are more of those type of people.
There are, and thank you for being one of the leading voices of the majority in your generation. You are doing amazing work. We are so grateful for everything that you do, and God, keep it up, Victor.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. I was going to say, keep it up. This energy is infectious. Truly. I know everybody watching is very inspired and will be looking you up if they don't know who you are already. Please follow Victor. I get all of my news from you, and I hope other people will start getting it from you as well. So we'll see you out there on Twitter. And also, I hope you're on Post. Are you on Post yet?
Yeah, so because of this Twitter world, now people have urged me to go on Mastodon, which isn't my favorite. It's really confusing, but Post is actually not bad. I signed up and I signed up last week and I just got approved the other day. And so I'm slowly making my way on Post and Mastodon, but I'm also on Twitter until the end.
Okay, until the end. Same here. So we'll all find each other there in the new spaces that Gen Z and apparently me, if I can figure out Mastodon, will be.
I'll be on Post. Yeah.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for both of what you do and trying to make this democracy a better place. It really matters. And I'm grateful for both of your voices too.
Oh, and we are for you. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you, Victor. I just was hoping he was going to tell me how to get on Mastodon, and I'm like, I should have asked more. I should have been like, please tell me how you've got on. I can't figure it out, and how
because I'm trying so hard to use your product, and I
just can't.
It's spectacularly failing for.
Yeah, I feel like a big failure. Really, I'm going to spend a lot of my holiday time thinking about trying to figure out Mastodon while I enjoy my time on Post because it is. Lovely there. So encourage everybody to sign up and find us there. I'm on stage on all platforms. Lisa, you're
at LC Senecal. Find me definitely on Post, on Twitter, on TikTok, on Instagram. We're kind of all over the place. So even if the Twitter stops twittering, we're still going to be out there. And we will keep looking for all of you when we're out there trying to find each other again.
Exactly. So we are so grateful that we are all going into this holiday season with at least a blue Senate. I know I am. And so please
add one more.
Yes, we are. Very excited for that. And I am just grateful for everybody's contributions to our show, to the Lincoln Project, whether that be by sharing the shows or by donations, which you can still donate to the Lincoln Project. Even though the elections are over, but the fight is not. The fight is not. It's never over. So we're just we're taking a nice break, a nice hiatus. Spending time with our fam, trying to find them, really. Like, where's my child? I've been busy. You know,
He doesn't answer the phone.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank all of you. We are just filled with gratitude, and we are going to go out this episode with an ad from the Lincoln Project.
Crucial victory for President Biden.
Democrats now have control of the United States Senate.
That's a terrible night for Republicans.
The Republican Party needs to do a really deep introspection look in the mirror right now.
I never expected that we were going to turn these red counties blue.
If they win, I should get all the credit, and if they lose, I should not be blamed at all.
Donald Trump didn't change the Republican Party. He revealed it.
I don't believe we're in elections right now that are about right versus left or Democrat versus Republican.
There's no saving this party.
It's a pro-democracy coalition against this authoritarian movement.
The whole idea is like you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's all these people do all day.
The MAGA mandate doesn't require governing. It's never been about that.
They yell fire in a crowded theater the size of the United States of America.
The MAGA mandate has been about democracy denying, about undermining our elections and institutions, about sowing division, chaos.
What we've been doing for a long time is splitting off small amounts of Trump's vote. We call it the Bannon line.
Those people who were once part of your GOP base, they don't recognize that.
There's a crack in the Republican base.
That's not who they are anymore.
This year, the Bannon line expanded not from 3 to 8%, but from 7 to 11%.
At the start of this thing, we identified 3 existential threats to democracy.
The governor's races in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania.
Well, they're busy looking at our head fake with a couple of ads getting into Ron DeSantis' cage. We were whacking them from the other side, and that's exactly what we did.
We are an iceberg. On the tip of the iceberg, you see the cool viral ad, and you think that's all we do. We are crafty motherfuckers.
We're not trying to save the Republican Party. We're trying to burn the Republican Party to the ground.